All right. Welcome to our presentation, Music in Motion, Echoes of History, the Impact of African American Diaspora through Music, its musical expression. This is presented by myself, Wayne West, John Sanford, and Artiese Williams. If we could go to the next slide, please. All right. So this portion of the presentation is called Origins of Music. Next slide. Uh, and to ground us in the now, I would like to invite you all to take three collective deep breaths with me. A deep inhale and an exhale with a sigh. Inhale, exhale, and one more. Inhale, exhale, sigh it out. Thank you for participating. In African numerology, the number three represents balance and harmony and symbolizes the union of opposites like the mind, body, and spirit. The breath in African spirituality is the vehicle that connects our individual selves to the divine, the cosmos, and our ancestors. In and of itself, the breath holds so much energy because within this Afrocentric context, it becomes a carrier of our history, a protector of our life, and an element of musical relief because breathing is also viewed as a consciously radical act of self-preservation and persistent resilience. As a people, this is who we are: resilient and persistent music in motion. Next slide, please. As we've been preceded by the breath with deep intention, I'd like to take this moment now to honor the ancestors who have preceded us. Um, Jeanette Freeman, um, Ashe, Leontine Franklin, Ashe, um, Rosie and Ulysses May, Ashe, Reverend Dr. Willie Williams Sr., Ashe, Teresa Scott Garcia, Ashe, James and Fannie B. West, Ashe, William and Mahalia Rolfe, Ashe, Early and Mary Hooks, Ashe, Eli McCoy and May Deacons, Ashe. To the freedom fighters who used music to tell our history: James Weldon Johnson, Billie Holiday, Nina Simone, Ashe, Gil Scott Heron, James Brown, and Marvin Gaye, Ashe, Tupac Amaru Shakur, Christopher Biggie Smalls Wallace, Nipsey Hussle, Ashe. To close this out, we say to all of the souls that gave their life for the plight of African liberation, ancestors from the East, ancestors from the South, ancestors from the North, and ancestors in the West, we honor you as we honor these four winds: Ashe, Asheo, and Amen. Next slide. For those unfamiliar to such Afrocentric practices, this was the act of opening sacred space and a form of digital libations to honor our collective history orally as a people. Across the continent of Africa, the task of reminding the village of its history and cultural beliefs was conducted by a griot or a jelu, and their reciting of history through music or poetry in griot culture was meant for the history of that people to be intrinsically tied into the fabric of everyday life, to be seen as a function of our daily activities as a part of the everyday culture. The position of a griot wasn't only relegated to men, women also participated in this role as griotesses and jelimusos. The storytelling of a griot was an embodiment of West African philosophies like Ubuntu and Sankofa, which roughly translate into I am because we are and go back and get it. These two philosophies encompass the heart of this presentation. because we, and as just an introduction to and an overview of the presentation, we, Artiese Williams, John Sanford, and I, myself, Wayne West, have elected to embody the role of griots who went back in time to connect the foundational pieces of our musical traditions to the ways in which these same elements are present within the music we listen to today. Included in this introduction will be a deeper dive into the concept of griots and the musical traditions of African culture. Then I'll pass it to the spotlight to Artiese, who will cover a timeline of musical evolution. And then John will carry this presentation home by teasing out the variety of ways that music has historically been used as a vehicle for revolution. Next slide. Now, to dive back into the elements of a griot. When a griot spoke, it wasn't just on the history and culture of a people, but they'd use music and poetry to keep alive the familial genealogies and preserve the memories of empires, kingdoms, geographical migration patterns, and the village morals that were typically spoken in an African proverb style. Their roles included tribal diplomats, educators, and advisors to the royal court. The earliest name griot, Yasire, dates back to the Soninke epic in 8th century Ghana. And from here, historians were able to trace the formalization of the griot's role in African culture to Bala Faseke Kuyote in the 13th century Mandi people who served the legendary Sundiata Keita of the Mali Kingdom. As previously mentioned, griot would recite history to a musical background, and some of the instruments used were stringed harps like the kora, which you can see below, the griot holding a kora below, and the ngoni, and the balafon, which is also has an image below, which was like a wooden xylophone that added melodic depth to their practice. Inherent to African culture is the use of drums and horned instruments. On a vibrational level, the use of these elements serve to usher in the ancestral helping spirits and reinforce a deep sense of community within the village. A griot was often an inherited position based on the bloodline of the family one belonged to, and the oral transfer of knowledge would begin in early childhood. However, with the progression of time, griots emerged from non-traditional familial backgrounds. Next slide. Um, as we move toward colonialism and I continue to research the history of the griot, I found it extremely insightful to discover that although the arrival of European colonialism may have diminished their role or their presence within the royal courts of Africa, I saw that their importance as a cultural custodian actually increased significantly. Um, Colonial powers view griots as potential agitators because of their ability to invoke deep spiritual and emotional responses from their listeners. Their voices in the village became synonymous with maintaining a sense of cultural identity and an initiation of anti-colonial movements, as they'd often weave subtle messages of resistance into their songs. So as we transition to the element or the era of Negro spirituals, while griots did not have the same level of presence in the United States as they did in their homeland, they still maintain a covert presence as chattel slavery progressed. However, the change in location also brought a change in the method. What was once carried out by griots became the building blocks for Negro spirituals and resistance songs because singing allowed an enslaved person to maintain a sense of humanity and agency in a society that treated them as property. In addition to maintaining a sense of agency, enslaved Black folks used music and song, sometimes in place of written communication, to discuss life, death, spiritual philosophies, and emotions. Ralph Metcalf, a former folklorist, American sprinter, and former U.S. congressman, noted that music was one of the most stable aspects of West African culture because of a reasonably cohesive musical system and the function of music at the core of African society. It was through music that we had the direct connection to our African roots. And because of its association with resistance, slaveholders attempted to destroy African culture, yet it is here that we can see a direct link between the griot of West Africa and their influence upon the African American. After the 1739 Steno Rebellion in South Carolina, whites of the day prohibited the use of drums because they were considered to be a dangerous tool of communication. In place of drums, the body and songs were used to communicate or to continue covert communication. For example, songs like Wade in the Water and Swing Low, Sweet Chariot are examples of Negro spirituals that carried the griot spirit of coded messages within them. The deeper meaning of Wade in the Water were meant to be seen as instructions for those who fled slavery to wade in the water because the bloodhounds couldn't track an escapee scent in the water. And Swing Low, Sweet Chariot was known to be a code song for the Underground Railroad that meant it was a safe time to travel by the railroad conductors. In his autobiographical narrative, Frederick Douglass stated that the singing he grew up around was a testimony to against slavery and a prayer to God uh, for deliverance from the chains. To those songs, he stated that he traces his first glimmering conceptions of the dehumanizing characters of slavery. Next slide. When reflecting upon multiple identities of the griot, poets like Phyllis Wheatley and George Moses Horton used their gifts to continue to remind the people of the need to resist chattel slavery, and choirs like the Fisk Jubilee Singers carried the tradition of embedding history into music to keep the essence of the griot alive. According to Willie Page and Hunt Davis, authors of the Encyclopedia of African History, volumes 1 through 5, the range of the griot artistry often included audience participation, and many historians have linked the call and response between the griot and the audience to modern day African American church traditions. Um, and the grounding exercise that we participated in, that you all participated in with me, would be one of those uh, call and response type of or participation, audience participation activities. Um, as Black folk, music has always been tied to our history and the times we face. Storytelling has also been intrinsic to our culture. And then as we round the corner to the next portion of this presentation, I'd like to leave you with this. We are because our ancestors were Ubuntu. And it is our charge to go back and get the mighty precious connection to our history that we have left behind. Thank you. And I will pass the presentation to Artiese.
Thank you, Wayne. So now we would talk about a living timeline of African American music evolution. First, we will start with enslavement era from 1600s to 1865, the birth of sound and survival. If we begin at the root, we must begin in a place where voice itself was an act of resistance. Enslaved Africans, stripped of language, land, and legal identity, carried one thing that could not be confiscated: rhythm. In the field, in the hush harbors, in the quiet spaces between the surveillance and survival, music emerged not as performance, but as a necessity. Spirituals, work songs, and field hollers were not simply expressions of sorrow. They were encoded maps, communal prayers, and psychological lifelines. The call and response structure, deeply rooted in West African traditions, allowed for collective participation, reinforcing community in a system designed to fragment it. Songs such as Wade in the Water and Still Away function as both spiritual declaration and strategic communication, signaling movement, resistance, and hope. As scholars note, spirituals often carried double meaning that communicated both religion, faith, plans for escape. In this era, music held a dual consciousness. It spoke to God while simultaneously speaking to freedom. This moment establishes the foundation of African American music as a tool of survival, resistance, and cultural continuity. Reconstruction and post-emancipation from 1865 to 1900s, from hidden voice to public sound. With emancipation came a fragile and incomplete freedom. It is open, yet it opened a new space for sound to move from secrecy into visibility. Groups like the Frisk Jubilee Singers transformed spirituals into music, introducing global audience to the depth of Black musical traditions. This marked a shift from hidden expressions to public cultural contributions. At the same time, the early blues began to take shape in the rural South. Unlike spirituals, which emphasize collective experiences, the blues centered the individual voice. It articulated longing, displaced, and survival in a changing world. As Gates suggests, this period reflects a transition where African Americans began shaping their identities more visibly within the American culture. The blues carried forward the emotional weight of slavery while opening space for personal storytelling. Moving right into the early 20th century, 1900s to the 1930s, blues and jazz birth freedom in sound. North and West, they carried their musical traditions into urban environments where blues evolved and merged with other forms to create jazz. Jazz became a revolutionary sound, structured, reflecting both constraint and freedom. Artists like Louis Armstrong transformed music by centering um, improvisations, which symbolize autonomy and creative agency. As Southern explains, jazz represented a new Black aesthetic rooted in both African traditions and modern American life. This era marks the moment when African Americans' music begins to define American music itself. Harlem Renaissance and Swing era, 1920s to 1940s. Figures like Duke Ellington and Ella Fitzgerald elevated jazz into a sophisticated form that demanded recognition. Yet this recognition existed alongside segregation. Black reformers performers were celebrated on stage while denied equality off stage. This contradiction reflects what Gates describes as the ongoing tension between Black cultural contributions and systemic exclusion. Despite this, the music itself expanded into complexity and reach, reinforcing Black excellence as undeniable. Civil rights era, 1940s to 1960s. Music as protest. During the civil rights movement, music became inseparable from activism. Rooted in gospel traditions, songs were used in marches, protests, and collective gatherings. They provided emotional strength and unity in the face of violence. Artists like Aretha Franklin and Sam Cooke transformed personal pain into collective anthems. Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come captured the urgency of the movement, reflecting what many African Americans were experiencing. As Reagan notes, freedom songs were the glue that held the movement together. Music was no longer just reflective, it was mobilizing. Black Power and Funk Era, 1960s to 1970s, Identity and Empowerment. Following the legislative gains, African American communities began freedom looked like. Music shifted from um, integrationist tones to expressions of identity and pride. Artists like James Brown declared cultural ownership through songs like Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Funk emphasizes rhythm, embodiment, and presence. It aligned with the broader Black power movement, reinforcing self-determination and cultural affirmation. This era demonstrates how music became a direct expression of political consciousness and identity formation. Hip hop birth, 1970s, 1980s, voice of the streets. Hip hop emerged in the Bronx as a response to systemic neglect, poverty, and urban marginalization. It reintroduced storytelling as a central element of music, echoing traditions from slavery and the blues. Artists like Grandmaster Flash and later Tupac Shakur used music to document lived realities and challenged systems of power. As Rose argues, hip hop became a cultural form that articulates the experience of urban Black youth. It continues the lineage of music as both narrative and resistance. You have the Golden Age and conscious rap, 1980s to 1990s. Knowledge and resistance. Hip hop became a global political voice, continuing the protests and traditions. 2000s to 2010s, global influence and genre blending. Black music became global dominant culture while still addressing identity and power. And so it brings us to this present day, the 2020s to now, healing, identity, and innovation. Today, African American music exists as a global force while maintaining its historical roots. Artists like Kendrick Lamar explores themes of identity, trauma, spirituality, and healing, reflecting a more introspective turn. Modern music demonstrates a full circle movement, returning to themes of community, ancestral connection, and emotional truth. It continues to serve as a space for both resistance and restoration, highlighting the enduring role of music in African American life. This timeline is not a series of isolated eras, but a continuous thread of resilience, creativity, and transformation. Each genre builds upon the last, carrying forward the emotional, cultural, and political weight of African American history. As Gates illustrates, African American history and its music is defined by both struggle and innovation, shaping not only Black identity, but the broader American cultural landscape. Now I will turn it over to John.
All right, you guys, let me continue. We have heard from my cohorts, Wayne, talking about our history with music, talking about our ancestors, what they have went through and what they have endured, moving along to Artiese, reinforcing what was said and adding the timeline of the music, the rich history, how we used music to deal with what we dealt with. So I will not reinvent the wheel. I will not repeat what has been said, but I will talk about our recap. And the recap is based on resistance, survival, identity. Next slide. So remember the resistance, the survival, the identity. It all talks about a resilient group of people. So the core idea why music became resistant, African American music has consistently served as a powerful tool for resistance, survival, and identity. Historically, African Americans were denied political, social, and economic power. So music naturally became an accessible way to express the truth and challenges of oppression. Next slide. So, spiritual, the connection to our higher power. Spirituals became a powerful form of hidden resistance. While they appear to be religious songs, they often contained coded messages about escape, survival, and hope. Songs like Follow the Drinking Gourd were used to communicate directions for Underground Railroad music during this time. It was not expression, but a strategy for survival and resilience. Remember, next slide, resistance, survival, identity. So this takes us into our blues that we introduced earlier. Again, we talk about how we use this to endure, how we use this to be resistance for the resilient people. After the emancipation, African Americans continued to face racism, segregation, and violence under the Jim Crow laws. The blues emerged as a way to express these harsh realities while the music focused on individual experiences. It reflected broader social conditions affecting the Black communities. The blues became a form of documentation, capturing the truth of everyday life that was often ignored by mainstream society. A powerful example is Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, which directly exposed the violence of lynching and brought attention to racial injustice. Next slide. Remember, resistance, survival, identity. The civil rights movement, music as protest and unity. During the civil rights movement, music became a central force in organizing, motivating, and sustaining activism. The Black church served as a gathering place, and gospel music provided spiritual encouragement and strength. Songs like We Shall Overcome became anthems of unity and preservation. At the same time, artists such as Nina Simone and Marvin Gaye used their music to directly address injustice and demand social change. Music during this era shifted from hidden resistance to open protests, becoming a powerful tool for political consciousness and collective action. As we move to the next slide, let's not forget resistance, survival, identity. So as we move down our timeline through time, our hip hop, modern resistance, and revolution. Hip hop emerged in the Bronx during a time of economic hardship, marginalization, a lack of opportunity. It became a platform for expressing the realities of life in underdeserved communities, often described as the CNN of Black America. Hip hop reports on issues that are frequently ignored by mainstream media. Our artists, our songwriters, our performers use this as a vehicle of the resistance. Again, resistance, survival, identity. Next slide. The evolution of music as resistance. Across time, the role of music has evolved while maintaining a consistent purpose. During slavery, music was used for survival and coded communication. The blues expressed emotional and social realities. Civil rights music became a tool for protest and unity. Hip hop continues this progression by directly challenging systems of power. The evolution shows how resistance through music has moved from hidden and symbolic to open and direct, reflecting change in social and political conditions. As we transition to the next slide, I simply want to bring your attention to how the cultural impact, identifying healing and community. Beyond resistant, music has played a crucial role in strengthening African American identity and community. It preserves cultural traditions, connects generations, and provides a shared sense of belonging. Music also serves as a form of emotional healing, allowing individuals and communities to process trauma and build resilience. It is both a reflection of struggle and a source of strength. As we move to the next slide, remember resistance, survival, identity. In conclusion, I want to leave you with this. We've heard about how we're Black and proud. That speaks to our resilience, our survival, our identity. We've heard about our silent drums because of legislation that was so scared that we as a people will use that against them. And so they try to silence us. So as we talk about this thread, I want to express our fabric, our amazing fabric to highlight the resilience, survival, and identity of our people. The rhythm, the music, is an indelible mark. It cannot be erased because of our resistance, our survival, and our identity. Thank you.